My name is Calvin Murray. At least in my experience, it has always seemed like a balancing act. You do what you believe is correct. You accept responsibility and presume your partner notices the effort you put in. Since Lydia and I married, I've naturally taken the lead in keeping things ordered. We never decided on it together. It just happened. Bills had to be paid, so I handled them. The house needed maintenance, so I took care of it. If something broke, I would either fix it myself or contact someone who could. Lydia wasn't incapable. She simply didn't seem interested in those things. I didn't mind taking them on. It felt like my role. I assumed we had an implicit understanding. I took care of the logistics, while she handled everything else. But, over time, I began to observe small details falling through the cracks on her end. Missed appointments. Tasks were forgotten. Little things were left undone. I assumed she was just busy or distracted. So I did what I thought would help. I reminded her that if there was a bill, I would inquire if she had paid it. If something needed to be arranged, I'd follow up to ensure she had established a date. If she stated wanting to do something around the house, I'd check back later to see if she had completed it. To me, it was just straightforward communication to keep things on track. However, Lydia perceived it as a form of control. She never stated it explicitly at first, but I could sense the annoyance on her face whenever I asked her about it. Her sighs became louder. Her responses became shorter. She began brushing me off with, "Yes, I will get to it," in a tone that indicated she was tired of hearing me inquire. I didn't get it. Why was this such a big deal? I was just making sure everything got done. However, Lydia interpreted my reminders as orders, as if I didn't trust her to handle situations on her own. I never intended to make her feel that way. But the more I attempted to help, the more she distanced herself. She began delaying things on purpose, waiting until the last possible moment to handle anything so she wouldn't have to answer my questions about it. I could sense her resentment growing, but I didn't know how to address it. From my perspective, I was doing what any decent spouse would do. But in her eyes, I was treating her like a child who needed to be controlled. And the worst part? I didn't see the blast coming. It happened on a seemingly ordinary night. We'd completed supper, and I was clearing the table as Lydia looked through her phone. It was just minor reminders, as I went over a few tasks that needed to be completed. I stated that the internet bill was about to be renewed, and inquired if she had already taken care of it. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I felt a shift in the air. She sighed and laid her phone down. "Why are you continuously doing this?" she mumbled beneath her breath. I blinked, caught off guard. "Do what?" I inquired, honestly perplexed. She turned to face me completely. Her countenance was already set in annoyance. She was continually reminding me, nagging me, and behaving as if I couldn't handle my own life without you hovering over me. "I don't need you to make decisions for me. Calvin, I am not your property." Her voice raised in rage. "I can manage my affairs without you continuously telling me that I'm your servant." I stood there, absolutely startled. I had never imagined myself as someone who ruled her. I had never spoken to her as if she were beneath me. Everything I did was intended to help, to ensure that nothing fell through the gaps. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but no words came out. What exactly was I supposed to say? I was just trying to keep things organized. That I saw her not as a servant, but as a collaborator. Would she actually believe me? Instead, I simply stood there, feeling the weight of her words. Settle in. If she honestly felt this way, why argue? She clearly did not regard my reminders as helpful. She considered them as a kind of control and an insult to her independence. If that is the case, then, maybe I'd been mistaken all along. Perhaps I had been pushing too hard without realizing it. So I did something I would not have done before. I took a big breath, nodded once, and simply replied, "All right." That was it. No argument, defense, or justification. "That is all right." I'm not sure if she expected me to fight back and defend my point of view. But I didn't. I simply wiped my hands with a dish towel, strolled over to the couch, and sat down in silence. If she desired independence, she could obtain it. She demanded control, so I gave it to her. No more reminders. No more checking in to see if she had made an appointment or paid the bill. I no longer ask whether anything in the house needs to be fixed. If I noticed the gas gauge in her automobile getting dangerously low, I didn't say anything. It was not easy at first. I'd spent years naturally stepping in, keeping things on track, and ensuring everything worked well. There were times when I considered speaking up out of habit, but I reminded myself that she wanted this. Lydia first appeared to enjoy her newfound liberty. She didn't have me looking over her shoulder, wondering if she had handled anything. She could get through her day without being reminded of deadlines or responsibilities. I could tell she appreciated the independence. the feeling that she was entirely in control of herself. She began making decisions without consulting me, which was okay. She arranged appointments when she felt like it, took things at her own pace, and didn't feel required to keep me updated on her activities. It was as if she had been waiting for this opportunity to show that she didn't need me to manage things. However, I discovered that independence did not imply preparedness without my prompting. Small things began to slip between the cracks. She missed a payment on a membership she intended to cancel, only to discover it after the amount hit her account and there was no refund policy. She planned a work meeting at the same time as a doctor's visit, which I would have seen if I had reminded her to check her schedule. Small inconveniences, nothing disastrous. Nonetheless, she brushed them off, forging forward with a confidence that I respected despite the warning signs. I said nothing. I didn't intervene. The first serious issue arose with the electricity bill. She'd forgotten to renew her payment. And one afternoon, she arrived home to find the power had been turned off. I recall her storming into the living room, phone in hand, frustration written all over her face. "The electricity is out. Have you forgotten to pay it?" she inquired as if it were still my responsibility. I looked up from my laptop and responded quietly, "No. The bills are in your name. You were expected to renew it." Her countenance shifted quickly between disbelief, indignation, and something more. Embarrassment, perhaps. Without another word, she turned away and contacted the electricity company, attempting to resolve the issue. I could hear the irritation in her voice as she negotiated the automated system, her bulk becoming larger with each passing minute. Then followed the car trouble she had been experiencing every day. I had no idea it was overdue for service, something I normally keep track of. She ignored the warning indications, such as the harsh idling and the occasional jerking as she accelerated. It wasn't until the check engine light lit up that she recognized something was wrong. By the time she took it in, the mechanic informed her that what could have been a simple servicing had become a more expensive repair. That one struck her harder than the power bill. She didn't say anything when she got home that night, just slammed her keys on the table and sat there quietly. I understood what she was thinking. If I had still been in charge of these matters, the situation would not have escalated. But she wasn't about to confess it. Not yet. Her tension began to seep into other aspects of her life, particularly employment. She'd always been organized. But without my reminders, she was missing things she had never missed before. One evening, I strolled into the kitchen and found her looking blankly at her laptop screen. Her sleepy eyes were giving off a harsh glow. I asked whether she was all right, and she let out a harsh sigh before responding. "I neglected to arrange a crucial deadline. It is too late now." She didn't look at me while she said it. She simply sat there, pounding her fingers against the counter, her frustration palpable. I will not lie. It wasn't easy watching her struggle. There were numerous times when I had to bite my tongue, when I wanted to intervene and tell her to correct things before they became worse. But every time the temptation struck, I reminded myself of what she said that night. I was not doing this to punish her. I simply didn't see the purpose in forcing support on someone who didn't want it. However, there was something unnerving about it. It didn't feel nice to watch her fumble through things. She used to manage things easily, but I no longer felt responsible. That was the true difference. Previously, if she forgot something, I considered it my responsibility. That was her problem. That discovery gave me an odd sense of relief. As the weeks passed, the tension in the house became impossible to ignore. We weren't fighting like we used to, but we also weren't talking. It was as if we were strangers living together. The warmth that had previously existed, the easy discussions, and the casual laughter were all gone. Lydia withdraws into herself. She spent more time in the bedroom, browsing through her phone or working late at the dinner table. When we did speak, it was brief and clipped, as if two coworkers were communicating the most basic information needed to get through the day. There was no more. "How was your day?" No more. "What would you want for dinner?" It was simply stillness stretched so thin that it felt suffocating. I knew she was resentful of me. She didn't say it explicitly, but I sensed it. She expected me to push back, to fight her on this, to keep stepping in even after she begged me to stop. She expected me to eventually break down and return to my previous ways of managing things. But I did not. I just let things play out, which frustrated her more than anything. One night, as I was watching TV, she went past me and came to a stop near the kitchen. I knew she wanted to say something. She waited for a moment before shaking her head and retiring to bed, without saying anything. I did not follow her. I just sat there, staring at the dark screen, feeling the weight of the space between us. Everything culminated one night. The house seemed quieter than normal. I was seated at the kitchen table. I was mindlessly scrolling through my phone while Lydia stood by the sink, staring down at an empty coffee mug as if it held the answers to all of our problems. She had recently become more aloof than usual, going about her daily routine without saying much. But tonight felt different. At first, she said nothing. She just stood there with her back to me, grasping the edge of the counter. Then, unexpectedly, a tiny sob burst through the silence, and she covered her face with both hands, as if she was trying to keep herself from coming apart. She murmured, "I can't do this anymore." Her voice was wobbly and fragile, unlike the strong-willed lady I'd married. I placed down my phone and studied her for a bit, unsure what to do. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when she finally admitted that things weren't working. But now that it had arrived, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt exhausted. Lydia took a deep breath, but her voice remained wobbly as she spoke again. I never intended to say I didn't need you." She wiped her face aggressively, as if she was upset with herself for breaking down in front of me. I really didn't want to feel obligated for a long time. I did not respond. So this is what it was all about. Her worry of being a burden, of feeling handled rather than cherished. I leaned back in my chair and slowly exhaled. "Lydia, I never viewed you as a duty." My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "I never saw you as property or someone I had to control. I believed I was being responsible. I thought I was assisting, but you." I paused, selecting my words carefully. "You made it appear as if everything I did was about power. I enjoyed telling you what to do. This was never the case." She sniffed and turned to face me, her eyes red and full of sadness. "I understand," she admitted. "I guess I was so focused on proving myself that I convinced myself you were the enemy. And that was not fair." I nodded carefully, taking in her words. It was difficult to hear, but it was honest. And, for the first time in weeks, it seemed like we were finally speaking what needed to be heard. We sat at the table for hours, talking about everything we'd been ignoring for too long. Lydia admitted that she had miscalculated the amount I had taken on in our marriage. She'd always assumed that things were done because they had to. But now she recognized how much of that burden had fallen to me. She admitted that she had initially appreciated the freedom of handling things on her own. But as time went on, she began to feel overwhelmed. She didn't want to ask for assistance because she was concerned it would show that she couldn't handle it. I listened, and when it was my turn, I told her how I really felt. I admitted that I could have trusted her more. I could have backed off sooner rather than constantly reminding her of things. At the same time, I admitted to her that I had been unappreciated for a long time. I'd never minded taking the initiative, but the way she ignored my efforts made me feel as if my love was misunderstood for control. That's what stung the most. By the end of the conversation, there had been no spectacular apologies, no promises to be perfect from now on. Simply an understanding of what needed to change. We agreed that things had to change moving forward. I would quit micromanaging, but she had to communicate when she needed assistance rather than letting things fall apart. She'd take more initiative, but I still wanted to feel appreciated in our marriage. It wasn't about either of us winning or losing. It was all about achieving balance. For the first time in what seemed like forever, the atmosphere in the room became more relaxed. We weren't miraculously repaired, but we had finally stopped pretending everything was all right. That was at least the beginning. In the days that followed, things did not magically return to normal. Lydia would start to ask me a question, and then stop herself, because she wasn't sure whether she should. And there were times when I found myself wanting to remind her of something, only to take a breath and let it pass. We were relearning how to work together, which would take time. But gradually, I began to detect an actual difference. Lydia became more proactive, taking responsibility for tasks she had previously overlooked or assumed I would handle. She arranged her own appointments and didn't require a reminder. She kept track of payments, issued self-reminders, and even brought the car in for service without waiting for me to say anything. It wasn't like she had suddenly changed into a different person. It was only now that she realized how important these things were. Simultaneously, I learned to step back. I was still present and interested, but not in such a way that she felt I was hovering. If she requested assistance, I provided it. If she required assistance, I supplied it. However, I no longer felt the need to carry anything on my own. For the first time in years, our marriage did not feel like a one-sided endeavor. We had reached our middle ground. Lydia got the independence she desired, and I had the partnership I had always wished for. Most importantly, we respected not only one another, but also the roles we played in each other's lives. Looking back, I know that love has never been about control. It was all about support. I had spent so much time making sure everything was running smoothly that I didn't realize how much my efforts made her feel like she had no voice in our lives together. And she had spent so much time opposing my involvement that she didn't realize how much. I only wanted to be recognized. We almost lost touch because of it. Fortunately, we figured it out before it was too late. And that concludes our narrative for today. Here's the next story. Sitting in that ridiculously expensive restaurant, with my wife and her family, I felt it in my bones. This location reeked of money. Crystal chandeliers cast a soothing glow over candlelit tables, draped in pure white serviettes, who glided like shadows in their black uniforms, carrying platters of steak that likely cost more than my vehicle payment. It was not my kind of place. If it were up to me, I'd go to a nice mid-range restaurant where I didn't have to pretend to enjoy chats about fancy handbags and expensive holiday resorts. But it was never up to me. My wife, Nina, was in her element. She sat between her sister Rachel and their mother, Evelyn, both dressed in expensive-looking but deceptively basic outfits. Across from me stood Nina's father, Daniel, whose presence felt more like a board meeting than a family reunion. He sipped his whiskey with an inscrutable look. I concentrated on my steak, chewing slowly, avoiding the subtle jabs Evelyn had been shooting at me all evening. "So, I'm still working at the same job?" she inquired, her tone oozing with polite scorn. I nodded and didn't bother to glance up. "We're still at it." "I heard they're laying people off in your field," she said. "You must be worried." I took a sip of water to relieve my frustration. Nina did not come to my defense. She has never done it with her mother. Instead, she smirked and twirled the stem of her wine glass in her fingers. Rachel giggled. "It must be exhausting to work so much and barely keep up." Her voice sounded soft, calculated. Daniel simply reclined back, eyeing me as if he already knew how the night would end. I should have seen it coming. The waiter arrived with the bill and placed the tiny leather folder on the table. I did not reach for it. We had agreed to split it beforehand, and I was already annoyed that I had to sit through this charade. At the very least, I wouldn't be paying for a dinner I didn't particularly enjoy. Then Nina did something that made my stomach sink. She shoved the bill toward me. "Go ahead and pay it," she added lightly. Almost amused, I frowned. "I assumed we were splitting," I said. She laughed, but not with the same warmth and genuineness as when we first met. This one was frigid. I practiced the type that made my skin crawl. "It's your responsibility to pay," she said. "If you do not like it, get divorced. You're not a member of our family anyway." The words landed like a smack. My attention shifted to her, then to Evelyn, who appeared content, then Rachel, who bit her lip. Daniel stifled a laugh and raised his glass in mute acknowledgement. They planned it. I looked down at the bill, my stomach tightening. $14. My fingers curled over the edge of the table, and my jaw tightened. The whole night had been a setup. The posh eatery and the casual jabs. They ordered without constraint. Bottles of wine, imported seafood, the most costly meals on the menu. They never intended to pay. It wasn't just dinner. This was humiliating. A test. I stared at Nina, looking for the slightest hint that this was a joke. A smirk, an elevated eyebrow. Something. But she simply stared back, waiting, daring me to protest. My blood became chilly. I could feel every eye in the diner focusing on me. For a brief minute, I considered taking out my wallet, swallowing my wrath, and enabling them to win one final time. But then Evelyn spoke. "A guy should be able to provide for his family," she added, her lips curling into a smile. "If it's so difficult, Nina should be with someone who can." Rachel gave a gentle, patronizing hum. "It's only money, Bruce. If you can't manage it, you probably shouldn't have married into a better family." Something inside of me cracked. I reached into my pocket and took out a single $20, carefully laying it on top of the check and smoothing it with my fingertips. Nina frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" she asked. I caught her gaze and beamed a genuine smile, one I hadn't worn in years. Standing up and straightening my jacket, I remarked, "You and your family can screw yourselves. If you claim to be the better family, then act accordingly and pay up. And if you can't pay, tell that sister and the old hag to look for a better man to pay on your behalf. I'm out." Her mouth dropped open. "Bruce." I turned on my heel and walked away. She struggled to her feet. "Bruce, don't you dare leave me," she shouted. I did not stop. She shouted my name again. Her voice was sharp, piercing through the hushed murmurs of the cafe. I continued walking. The cool night air assaulted my face as I went outside. My hand remained solid, not trembling with wrath this time. Just certainty. I'd let this go on for too long. Nina and her family had been testing me for years, stretching my limits and seeing how far I would go before breaking. It turns out they finally have an answer. Tonight, I broke. I walked to my car and climbed into the driver's seat. I wasn't even sure where I was headed. I simply knew I couldn't go home. Not yet. As I drove along Elm Street, the realization became crystal clear. The marriage was over. She just didn't realize it yet. I drove aimlessly around the city, the neon glimmer of streetlights flickering in my rearview mirror. The dashboard clock showed 11:45 p.m., but I wasn't ready to drive home. Home. The word felt hollow. It was no longer home. It was a trap. A place where I was nothing but a paycheck. Nina and her family see this as a stepping stone to further success. I repeated the dinner in my mind. She gave me a smug grin as she tossed the dollar at me, as if I were nothing more than a human wallet. Go ahead and pay it. It's your responsibility. If you do not like it, get divorced. The words burned into my memory, branding me with their finality. She did not respect me. She never had. I should have left her years ago. I turned onto Birch Avenue. The city lights faded behind me. I needed time to think and process. But the wrath grew with each passing second. They intended to ridicule me. Now it's time to feel my vengeance. The phone buzzed in the passenger seat. Nina. I ignored it the second time. A third by the fourth. My jaw clenched so tightly that I felt my teeth could break. She had some nerve calling me after what she did tonight. When it rang 5 times, I picked up my voice, crisp and cold. What? Her tone no longer conveyed superiority. There is no condescension. It's just fear. Come home immediately. I held the steering wheel with my free hand. Why? I inquired, and her trembling gasp broke the silence between us. A pause. Then click. The call went dead. I stared at my phone, my heart racing for a moment. I questioned whether this was just another game, a manipulative strategy, or a desperate attempt to guilt me into returning. But no. It felt strange. Nina never sounded terrified. Nina never needed me for anything. And now she begged. I did a U-turn so quickly that the tires squealed against the asphalt. My mind raced, divided between fury and concern. Yet my instincts told me to go back. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked hauntingly dark. The sole light came from the dull glow of the porch bulb, which created long shadows across the front grass. My stomach constricted. Something was not right. Nina stood outdoors, arms wrapped around herself and pacing barefoot. Her silk dinner dress was crumpled, and her hair looked unkempt as if she had pulled on it. When she noticed my automobile, she dashed toward me, clutching my arm. Thank God. Thank God you are here. I did not respond. My thoughts were already focused on the house, the driveway, and the street behind us. Everything appeared regular, yet something seemed odd. Tell me what occurred, I said, keeping my voice steady. Nina gulped hard. I was upstairs changing when I heard a sound downstairs. Footsteps. Then the power went off. I frowned. Power is out, she nodded. I tried to turn on the lights. Nothing worked. I grabbed my phone and hid in the closet. I examined her, looking for any signs of dishonesty. Nina was a lot of things, manipulative, devious, selfish, but she wasn't lying about her fear. Right now, she was afraid. I reached for the front door handle. It swung open too easily when unlocked. My stomach constricted. Nina never left doors unlocked. She grabbed my wrist. Don't go inside. Call the cops. I ignored her and went inside. The silence was deafening. My footsteps were too loud against the hardwood floor as I walked through the foyer. Out of instinct, I go for the light switch. Nothing. I took out my phone, its screen providing a faint glimmer in the dark. The air felt thick, as if the walls were holding their breath. Then I saw it. The back door. It was open just a little. It was just enough for someone to slip out. I proceeded rapidly, inspecting each room. The living room and kitchen are intact. But when I got to the bedroom, my stomach fell. Nina's jewelry box was open, its compartments empty. Her pocketbook had been strewn over the floor. Its contents are scattered. And the safe, the one where she stored emergency funds, was wide open, gutted. Nina arrived in the doorway, behind me. Her hands gripped her chest. When she saw the mess, she gasped. My money is gone, she exclaimed. I turned slowly, my face unreadable. How much? I inquired, my voice tight. Everything. My gems are gone, as is my emergency cash. I did not move. I did not even blink. Call the cops. She paused. That was everything I needed to know. I made a hesitant step towards her. My pulse is pounding. Nina, contact the cops. Her lips parted, but no words emerged. A red flag. A wave of knowledge struck me all at once. Her shoulders are tense. The way she refused to meet my gaze. The hesitancy before responding to me. I was not foolish. This wasn't simply a break-in. Nina knew something that I didn't. And she was hiding it. Her voice finally out, barely above a whisper. We cannot. My lungs exhaled slowly and coldly. Why not? I asked. She chewed on her lip. Her whole body tense. Then, without looking at me, she replied, I believe I know who did this. My stomach sank. The room around us felt smaller, and the shadows stretched longer. I made another step towards her. Nina, what have you done? She didn't respond. She did not have to. I already knew. I stood in a dimly lighted bedroom. My gaze was locked on Nina, who had yet to answer my query. What have you done? I asked again, my voice low and calm. Nina's arms curled around herself, and her body language exuded guilt. The silence between stretches was dense and stifling, filling the entire home. A house that suddenly didn't feel like mine. The bedroom was a disaster. Her purse overturned. The safe emptied. The jewelry box was looted. Despite the wreckage, nothing else had been touched. No smashed windows, forced entry, or ransacked living room. This did not happen at random. Whoever did this knew just what they were searching for. Nina knew exactly who they were. I made a hesitant step towards her. She flinched. Nina. My voice was steady, but my patience was becoming thin. Who did it? Her teeth gripped her lip, and her eyes darted toward the door, as if she were about to bolt. I moved in front of her and blocked her way. You will not go until you tell me the truth. Her breath caught. It's complicated. Uncomplicated. The first snapped. Her shoulders slumped. She eventually spoke. I believe it was Victor. The way she pronounced it meant more to me than the name itself. Her voice sank to a whisper, as if simply saying it aloud was harmful. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who the hell is Victor? I inquired, my jaw gritted. She hesitated, and for a little minute, it appeared that she intended to lie. She finally sighed. He's somebody I owe money to. The words landed like a hammer on my chest. I glanced at her, trying to understand what she had just said. You owe money to him. I reiterated, my voice flat. She nodded, unwilling to meet my gaze. How much? Silence. That was all the answers I needed. I took a deep breath, suppressing the burning frustration that was growing within me. How much? Nina. Her lips parted, and when she did speak, it was barely audible. $60,000. The room tilted. I had to take a step back, as if the air had been forced out of my lungs. $60,000. I let out a hollow, incredulous laugh, but it was not funny. It tasted bitter. $60,000, Nina. I shake my head. Running a hand through my hair. What the hell did you need that much money for? Her bottom lip quivered. I believed I could make a profit, she muttered. A profit? I reiterated, my voice flat. She nodded rapidly, as if she wanted to persuade herself rather than me. I invested it. I was planning to surprise you. Maybe you should schedule that Norwegian trip you've been talking about. Buy us a new automobile. I cut her off, knowing exactly where this was going. What have they invested in? Stocks. Crypto. She hesitated, and that hesitation revealed everything. My hands balled into fists. Did you gamble it away? Her mouth opened and then closed. Guilt washed over her face. I gave another sour laugh, shaking my head. Unbelievable. For years, I had made sacrifices for this marriage, working extra hours, paying the bills, and covering her frivolous spending, because she had convinced me she needed to enjoy life. And all this time, you were wasting $60,000 in get-rich-quick schemes. I inquired, my voice rising. I was trying to help us, she said quietly, her voice shaking. Help, I scoffed. You just got us, Rob. Nina. That's no help. That is selfish and dumb. Her face contorted with frustration. I did not intend for this to happen, but it did. I indicated around the shattered bedroom. And now we're standing in our looted home because of you. So, what is the next step? You think Victor will just let this go? Her breath quickened, and terror crept into her expression. I was going to repay him, she replied, her voice wavering. I had a plan. Oh yes, I moved closer, forcing her to meet my stare. What were your plans, Nina? Because, from where I'm standing, it appears that you were hoping that everything would miraculously disappear. She looked away, her silence spoke for her. That was it. That was the moment I realized our marriage was over. Not because of money, not because of the robbery, but because I no longer trusted her. And once destroyed, trust is nearly impossible to restore. I turned and approached the door. Where are you going? She asked, her voice trembling. I am leaving. I spoke without looking back. If I stay in this house any longer, I am not sure what I will do. Nina betrayed me. She had dragged me into her mess, treating me like an ATM. And now someone dangerous is after her. Which means they are now targeting me. I stepped outside and felt the chilly night air hit my face. The street was unnaturally quiet. Too quiet. Something felt odd. I looked to the end of the block. A black Dodge SUV was parked there. Its headlights are off. No engine noise, just sit there. A horrible feeling crept up my spine. I returned to the house. My thoughts raced. Nina lied to me. She had squandered away $60,000. She'd brought danger to our doorstep. And the worst part? It was merely the beginning. I just didn't realize how horrible it would go. I stood outside the home, looking at the black SUV parked at the end of the street. It was not moving. No headlights and no sound. I'm just watching. My pulse quickened. Nina's confession felt heavy on my chest. $60,000. She'd borrowed it. She'd lost it. And she had never thought of telling me. Not when she had borrowed it. Not after she lost it. Not even when she was aware she would be unable to repay it. And now our house had been robbed. And someone in an unmarked SUV was watching us. It wasn't simply about money anymore. This was about survival. I turned back towards the home. My thoughts raced. I had a choice. Walk away from this disaster before it drags me down. Step inside to see how deeply Nina had buried herself. I resented that I still cared. I despised that a part of me still felt responsible for her. With a deep exhale, I returned inside. Nina remained in the bedroom, standing precisely where I had left her, staring at the empty jewelry box. She appeared smaller now, unlike the woman who had laughed at me throughout dinner and pushed a $1.300 bill in my direction as if it were a joke. No, this Nina was different. This Nina was afraid. Good. She should be. Check everything I said. My voice was sharp and controlled. Your accounts and credit cards. You are safe. I want to know how much is missing. She paused. I inhaled gently and forced my voice to remain normal. Now, Nina. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone and scrolled through the banking app. Her breath caught. My checking account. It's empty, she explained. I clenched my jaw. How much was there? Nearly $10,000. A sour laugh escapes my lips. $10,000? Not even close to what she owed, but enough to hurt. How about your savings? I asked. She checked. Then it froze. She slowly raised her eyes to mine, and for the first time tonight, I saw genuine panic. They took everything. My fingers tightened into fists. Everything without a word. I turned on my heel and strode toward the closet. We kept a tiny safe within there. Emergency cash. Important documents. Passports. The door was slightly ajar. The electronic keyboard blinks. I'm waiting for your input. It had been forcibly opened. I yanked the door wider. Empty. The cash was gone. My passport was on the floor. Thank God. An icy rage surged through my veins. I turned back to Nina. How did they get this code? My voice was tight, hardly holding my rage. Her face turned pallid. I do not know. Try again. I made a hesitant step towards her. My voice is dangerously low. This was not a random break-in. They knew just where to search. They knew about the safe, the accounts, and the valuables. She gulped hard. Her gaze darted away. Nina. I spoke again. How did they get this code? Her silence was long and damning. Then, in a whisper, she spoke. I informed Victor about it. The room tilted. I clenched my eyes shut for a half second, placing my fingers against the bridge of my nose. You what? My voice was harsh, cutting through the dense silence between us. Nina flinched. I did not think. No. I shut her off, moving closer. You didn't think that was the issue, Nina? You never think. She swallowed hard, her fingers grabbing the edge of the dresser, as if it could somehow hold her. You owed a loan shark $60,000, and your best solution was to inform him where we kept our emergency funds. She grimaced. I believed he would understand. She whispered. I was intending to use some of it to start repaying him. I looked at her, taken aback by how casually she said it, as if she hadn't just delivered a blueprint to a criminal. Nina, you've just given him a roadmap to rob us. Her jaw clenched. I didn't believe he would actually do it. A sour, biting laugh escaped me. You don't give money to someone like Victor and expect mercy, Nina. You do not bet with money that you do not own. I paused mid-sentence, a new concept emerging in my mind. A darker and colder thought. What if Victor wasn't only trying to collect his debt? My gaze went around the room again. The safe and the missing money. The timing of everything. Nina humiliated me at dinner by throwing down a $1,300 bill, as if it were nothing. And then we were robbed. And now she is standing here, expecting me to fix everything. My stomach twisted. I've been played. I inhaled gently and fixed her with an icy stare. Tell the truth, Nina. Her eyes expanded. How did you stage this? Her mouth dropped open. I would never. I took a step forward and lowered my voice. Won't you? She shook her head furiously. Bruce, I swear, because I have been thinking. I continued, my voice calm but lethal. You humiliated me throughout dinner. You pushed a $1,300 bill to me, as if it were a joke. And now our house has been robbed. And you are broke. I extended the stillness between us, allowing her to feel the weight of my words. Isn't it convenient? Her breath caught. You believe in me. She gulped on the words. Her hands trembled. I would never. She whispered. I scoffed. You have already lied about the money, Nina. Why should I believe what you say? Her arms tightened around herself, and she shook her head furiously. I swear I did not set this up. I did not want this to happen. She spoke, her voice breaking. I focused on her breathing, the way her fingers curled around her phone. Perhaps she was speaking the truth. Perhaps she wasn't. Either way, I was finished. I turned toward the bedroom door. What are you doing now? She asked. Panic crept into her voice. I am leaving. Her breath caught. Wait, where are you going? We have to work this out. I paused at the doorway and glanced back. Nina, there is no more we. For the first time that night, I noticed terror in her eyes. Not Victor's fear. Not the fear of losing money, but the dread of being alone. She knew. She knew I was over. Her voice cracked when she called my name. But I did not stop. I grabbed my jacket and car keys and headed outside into the cool night air. The black Dodge SUV was gone, but I had a sense this wasn't the end. Definitely not. I drove with no destination. My thoughts raced as I watched the city lights whiz past. Nina had gambled $60,000 in a man like Victor. She had lied to me about this. And now we'd been robbed as a result of her reckless behavior. No, she'd been robbed, but I ended up paying for it. My fingers tightened around the driving wheel, and my knuckles turned white. My jaw ached from how firmly I had clenched it since leaving the house. Frustration blazed through every part of me. Not only because of the money, not only because of the robbery, but because I'd been so foolish for years. I had convinced myself that Nina was simply irresponsible, not malevolent, and that her spending habits were the result of poor judgment rather than willful selfishness. But this was a betrayal. She took out a $60,000 debt without telling me. She had squandered it away as if it were nothing. When she couldn't repay it, she had brought a criminal right to her house. What is the worst part? She hadn't even told me out of guilt. She told me that she had no choice. I pulled into a dark parking area and shut off the engine. My hands shook as I ran them across my face. I needed to consider how deep she was in. How deadly was Victor? And, most importantly, how the hell was I going to get out of this mess? As if on cue, my phone exploded. Nina. I ignored it. A minute later, it rang again. Then a text. Please come home. We need to talk. I laughed without humor. She wanted to chat now. I stared at the screen, my thoughts racing. I could ignore her. I could walk away right now and let her deal with the storm she caused. But if Victor was serious, and he had indeed robbed us, this wasn't over. I sought answers, and took a big breath. I started the car and turned back towards home. When I walked in, Nina was sitting on the couch with her legs curled under her. She appeared smaller than I'd ever seen her, with her normally flawless stance gone. Her confidence had been torn away. Good. She should feel small. She should feel the same way she made me feel at that blasted dinner table. She gazed up at me with a pallid face. I didn't expect you to come back, she added softly. Neither did I. I replied and closed the door behind me. She gulped hard. Please sit. Let me clarify. I did not move. No more games, Nina. No more falsehoods. Start at the beginning. She hesitated before taking a deep breath. Victor and I were introduced by a mutual acquaintance. He helps people make investments. I felt it was legitimate. I gave a harsh laugh. How did that work out for you? She grimaced. I gave him $20,000 to start. He claimed it will double in a month. And it did. My stomach turned. Did you truly get your money back? She nodded. At first, absolutely. It felt easy. Like I'd discovered a shortcut. I breathed gently, feeling my wrath simmer beneath the surface. Then I prompted. She gulped hard. I reinvested more money this time. $30,000. Then $40,000. But I became greedy. I did not pull out when I should have. Suddenly, the money was gone. Gone? I reiterated, my voice flat. Yes, she whispered. I believed I could make it back. I assumed it was simply a terrible trade. But then he told me that I needed to invest more to recoup my losses. My eyes closed, and my head pounded. And did you? She nodded miserably. $60,000. I looked at her in bewilderment. $60,000? I inquired, my voice cracking in agitation. You believe throwing in more money would solve the problem? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't mind. She had ruined us with her foolishness. And when you couldn't pay him back, I persisted. What happened then? Her lips twitched. He began threatening me. He stated that he would take what he was owed, that if I didn't pay soon, he'd come and collect. I felt my blood turn cold. So, you told him about the safe? She nodded. She had a miserable expression on her face. I assumed if he saw we didn't have enough, he'd back off. Instead, he sent others to take whatever they could. I clenched my jaw, my rage coursing through me. Nina, you let him into our home. She started crying harder. I wasn't sure what else to do. I turned aside, hands on my hips, attempting to breathe amidst the chaos. This was not simply a terrible decision. This was a betrayal. Not only to me, but to our house and safety. How much time did he give you? I asked in a tense voice. Nina paused for just a second. That is all it took. How much time? Her shoulders shook as I repeated my patience, cracking. He wants the money by tomorrow. I snapped when the world tilted under me tomorrow. And you're telling me this now? She sobbed in her hands. I was afraid. Rage surged through me, white, hot, and blinding. You were terrified, I snarled. You weren't terrified as you took his money. You weren't scared since you were wagering all the way. But now that you have endangered both of us, you want to wail. She whimpered, her breath quickening. Please do not holler. I inhaled sharply, trying to calm myself down. Yelling would not solve the problem. Crying would not solve the problem. I needed a plan. How does Victor often recover his debts? I asked. My voice. Keep it steady now. Cold. She wiped her tear-streaked face and sniffled. Sometimes he simply takes valuables. But what if someone has a lot? She paused again. My patience ran out. How much? She gulped hard. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He has them work for him. A horrible feeling settled in my stomach. Work. How? She did not respond, but I already knew. Men like Victor did not merely lend money. They own people. Nina too. She had just added herself to his list. The home was quiet, except for Nina's irregular breathing. She sat curled up on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, gripping her arms as if she were trying to keep herself together. I stood in the doorway and stared at her. My thoughts raced. Victor wants his money by tomorrow night. We did not have it. And now Nina was telling me that if she couldn't pay, he would force her to work for him. She never explained what that meant. But I didn't require any details. I ran my hand through my hair, exhaled slowly. We had nothing left, no savings. There is no emergency cash. I had separate accounts. Nina was unable to touch. Even if I drained everything, it wouldn't amount to $60,000 overnight. Even if it did, why should I save her? She did it. She got us into this situation. She'd embarrassed me, lied to me. We gambled away our safety and allowed a criminal into our home. And now she expects me to fix it. I clenched my jaw. No, I wouldn't be her safety net anymore. Without another word, I turned towards the stairs. Where are you going? Nina's voice was tiny and quivering from sleep. I said in a bland voice. She flinched. So, what do we do? I don't know. Nina, I replied without looking at her. You figure it out. And for the first time in our marriage, I truly meant it. I left her sitting there. Her gentle cries filled the lonely house as I went away. I hardly slept that night. Not because of Nina. Not because of the money, but because something about the whole situation seemed odd. The heist, the timing, the fact that Victor waited until today to steal everything. This wasn't only about debt. This was about control. Men like Victor did not simply take money. They took power. A shiver went up my spine. This was not over. Definitely not. I awoke at 3:12 a.m. to a sound. I knock. Slow and deliberate. My stomach constricted. I slid stealthily out of bed and retrieved the bat from under my nightstand. The home was dark. The sole light comes from the dull glimmer of the street lamps outside. Another knock. Even though I wasn't in a hurry, I went 3 times. I moved down the hall. My heart was pounding when I entered the living room. Nina was already standing at the door, transfixed. Don't open it, I instructed. She flinched but did not move. I moved closer. The locks remained in place even as I tightened my grip on the bat. Who is it? I called out. Silence. Then a voice. Calm. Smooth. Dangerous. Good evening. I did not recognize it. We are looking for Nina. A cold weight settled on my chest. I looked at Nina. Her face had turned pallid. Her fingers are grasping the hem of her shirt. She knew who it was. Victor? I mumbled. I took a deep breath and tried to settle my pulse. She is not accessible. I spoke evenly. A pause, followed by a chuckle. I believe you misunderstood, my friend. She owes me, and I always collect. I exchanged looks with Nina. She was shaking. I went back to the door. She will pay you. Just not tonight. I know she will. His tone was cold and intimidating. But, you see, I like to ensure cooperation. I clench my jaw, causing his eyes to glitter, indicating that she should begin repaying the debt right away. I took a step forward and gripped the bat tightly. She is not going anywhere with you. One of Victor's soldiers moved. The other grabbed for his jacket, but Victor raised a hand to stop them. He exhaled gently and flicked the cigarette onto my doorstep. You are brave. I like it. His sneer deepened. Fine. You have until tomorrow night. $60,000. No more stalling. I didn't respond. Victor smirked, as if he knew just how this would end. He turned and walked back toward the black Dodge SUV, saying, "See you soon," as his men stepped behind him. I watched as they drove away. My entire body was coiled so tightly, I felt I'd crack. I eventually closed the door. Nina sobbed in the corridor. I turned to face her. She sat against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees, and her entire body trembled. I should have felt bad for her. I did not. She'd done this to herself. To us. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if she cared. You lied to me, I said quietly and calmly. She sniffled but did not respond. You lied about the money and about Victor. You let him into our home. I took a slow stride forward. My fist is still clenched. And you expect me to fix it? Her head snapped up, her tear-stained face twisting with something unpleasant. I had not expected any of this to happen. She snapped. I gave a sharp, bitter laugh. You did not expect to lose $60,000. You did not expect a loan shark to come after you. I shake my head. Nina, you gambled and lost. Her terror faded, replaced by something else. Resentment. Oh, now you're the ideal husband. She sneered. Like you've never made a mistake. I made another step toward her, my voice hard and threatening. My missteps did not lead to a robbery. My mistakes did not put us in debt to a man who will seize everything from us if we do not repay him. My mistakes did not betray the person who was meant to be my companion. She flinched, but I was not finished. So don't sit there and pretend this is just another disagreement. I spoke, my voice rising. This is life or death, Nina. Her bottom lip quivered. I understand. Do you? I shot back because you've spent the entire time creating excuses rather than accepting your actions. She took in a nervous breath. What would you like me to say? She whispered. The truth. I replied strongly. It's not just about money. About everything. She froze. My heart raced as I took another step closer. What are you not telling me? Silence stretched between us. My patience ran out. Nina. I took a breath. She paused. Then whisper. She said that Victor is more than just a loan shark. My stomach turned. What? I inquired, my voice thick. She paused again, evidently reluctant to speak it aloud. I dated him. The air escaped my lungs in an instant. I stared at her, unable to comprehend the words. You what? She nodded, her gaze sliding to the ground. A rush of wrath passed through me so quickly that I had to clutch the edge of the table to stay upright. So it's not just about money, I replied harshly. It is about him. What about you? Her quiet was sufficient as an explanation. I turned aside, my hands shaking. It wasn't just that. This was personal. Now everything is made clear. Victor smiled at me as if he already had something of mine. Nina had hesitated when I questioned how serious she was about the threats. Victor was not only gathering money, he was also collecting her. It wasn't about me repairing things anymore. This was about Victor going after me. Nina had played both sides. I inhaled slowly, attempting to push my mind to focus past the wrath. This changed everything. If Victor desired vengeance, and if this was as much about me as it was about Nina, no amount of money could make it right. He'd come for us no matter what. Nina too. She knew it. She'd known it all along. You should have told me, I said in a loud voice. Nina let out a choking cry. I was afraid. What exactly are you scared of? I snapped that I was leaving, and that I would discover you were not just reckless, but also a liar. She swallowed hard, her eyes welling with tears. I was afraid. Was it fun? I inquired, my voice breaking through the tension in the room. What were your plans? To pay him $60,000 for being his. What? His hooker. Nina didn't respond, and I felt the truth settle in the air. We both understood what I was asking. I ran my hand through my hair, my mind racing. It had gone too far. I had allowed it to go on for too long. I hoped things would get better. But things had only gotten worse. Nina had taken out a loan for $60,000 without notifying me. She'd gambled it away. We are treating our future as if it were a toy. And now she'd led Victor right to our door. I paused in mid-thought, my jaw constricting. What if this is more than just collecting a debt? I inquired, my tone colder than I intended. Nina's breath caught. What do you mean? I looked around the room at the chaos, the shattered pieces of our lives. The robbery and the timing. Everything felt planned. Planned. Victor had been too calm, too confident in himself. This wasn't only about money. This was about control. And I had walked straight into it. I turned back to Nina. My voice sounded strained. They intended to embarrass me. Nina. They wanted me to feel as if I had no choice but to cave. That is why they tested me at dinner. It wasn't only about dinner. It was about seeing me break. And now you expect me to fix it? She shakes her head. No, I did not intend for any of this to happen. I laughed bitterly. You did not intend for it to happen? Okay, here we are. It happened, and now we have a debt to repay to a man who does not care about us. And you think I'll just fix it? Nina's lips tremble with bitterness. I don't know what to do, Bruce. I didn't imagine it would get this far. Well, it did, I stated plainly. And now I'm stuck cleaning up your messes, like I've done for years. Nina gazed at me, her face contorted with misery. I apologize. I didn't intend for it to go this way. I made a long and determined stride toward her. It's not about apologizing, Nina. It's about the decisions you make. You made those decisions, and now I have to pay the consequences. Her hands trembled as she wiped away the tears. Please, Bruce, do not leave me. I need you. I paused, staring at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to console her. I didn't feel anything, not a grain of empathy. She'd betrayed me. They humiliated me. They lied to me for years. And now she was standing here, pleading with me to help her get out of a position she had created. I shake my head. No, Nina, you don't need me. You need someone to clean up your messes. But I am done. Her voice crackled. Bruce, please don't leave. I am imploring you. I moved away from her and headed for the door. Goodbye, Nina. The words lingered in the air, definitive and chilly. I unlocked the door and took one more glance at her before stepping out. Her face was smeared with tears, and her eyes were desperate. Everything felt far away, as if I were staring at someone I no longer knew. She was no longer the lady I had married. She was a stranger. A woman had pulled me into her web of falsehoods, only to abandon me when it was time to face the consequences. I slammed the door behind me and walked out into the night. I did not sleep that night. The wrath, betrayal, and sense of finality hung on me like a stone. But, in the silence, I discovered something. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I stopped being an idiot. The moment I quit cleaning up her mess, Victor had no idea what was coming. I no longer cared what Nina had done. She had made her decisions. Now I needed to make mine. The following morning, I packed a little bag. Only the essentials. Clothes, a few personal items, my passport, and whatever else she could save. I didn't want anything that connected me to this life anymore. As I walked out of that house, I felt the weight of the past few years fall off my shoulders. It wasn't just a house for me anymore. It had been a prison, and suddenly I was free. As I stepped into the car, I took one last look at the house. A sense of tranquility flooded over me. I was finished. No more manipulation, no more falsehoods. There will be no more Nina. I drove off. And, for the first time in a long time, I felt clear. The life I had been leading was not mine. It had been hers. But now I was starting over. The next few weeks were a haze. I filed for divorce. Nina's family tried to contact me. Her mother, sister, and father. All of them are requesting explanations, trying to get me to come back. But I didn't listen. I did not know anything about them. Nina had made her decisions, and they now had to deal with the repercussions. I took some time for myself. I resumed an old interest that I had abandoned years ago, because Nina had labeled it a waste of time. I began playing guitar again. I worked out more and felt stronger than I had in years. But what is the best part? I was finally free. I wasn't concerned about Nina anymore. I was not concerned about her debt or the game she had been playing for so long. One day, I ran into a friend at a cafe. Mike. When he saw me, he raised his cup in greeting while continuing to ignore Nina. He inquired, amused. I chuckled. Yep. Good for you, man, he said. You are better off. I nodded and felt lighter than I have in years. A few months later, I received another contact from Mike. You won't believe what happened to Nina, he continued, smiling. Try me, I said. She tried contacting you again, Mike stated. Apparently, things did not proceed as expected. Victor turned against her. She has nothing left. I smirked. That is what you get. Mike laughed. I told you she wouldn't see it coming. Yes, I said. She assumed I'd always be there to solve her problems. But I am done. Mike shook his head and grinned. Well, she got what she deserved, and for the first time in a long time, I had no regrets. Nina had spent our entire marriage challenging me, trying to see how far she could push me. She had assumed I would always forgive her, that no matter what, I would be there to clean up her mess. But she was mistaken. 1 year later, I stood at the bar, Mike whiskey in hand. He raised his drink and smirked. "How does it feel to be free?" he asked. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass before slowly sipping. As if I had just been released from prison, I replied with a smile. Mike chuckled. "Yeah, but I guess you got screwed because you had to pay her $20,000 at the end." I shrugged. I did the math. If I had hired someone to keep me company during my entire marriage to her, it would have cost me almost the same. Mike nearly choked on his drink while laughing. Damn. Man. That is one perspective on the situation. I leaned back, feeling a weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bearing other people's troubles. It was only me. That felt really fantastic. Months later, I ran upon Mike again. We drank coffee together and talked like old friends. He raised an eyebrow at me, still ignoring Nina. He inquired with a smirk. Naturally, I laughed. "Good," Mike remarked, nodding in approval. "She does not deserve your time." I smiled and felt lighter than I had in years. "Exactly," I said, looking out at the busy streets. "She had her chance. And I'm finished." Mike grinned. "Good for you, man." "Yes," I said. "Good for me." I grinned to myself as Mike and I resumed talking. My chest felt peaceful. One I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying other people's troubles on my shoulders. I wasn't concerned about correcting anything. I was just living. "You appear different," Mike murmured, tilting his head as he observed me. "Good. Different." I gently breathed, feeling the weight of what had happened. "Get off of me." "Yeah, I'm happy," he asked, genuinely curious. I shrugged and took another sip of my coffee. More than I ever imagined I could be. "I am just free." We stayed there for a while, discussing everything and nothing. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about Nina or the disaster she'd made. I was not consumed by the lies or manipulation. I felt as if a load had been removed from me. 2 weeks later, I filed for divorce. The documents were delivered to Nina at her parents' home. The fallout was immediate. Just as I expected. Her family began addressing me as her mother, sister, and even her father, who had hardly talked to me during our marriage. But this time, I didn't want to hear what they had to say. The phone calls came in, and I shut them down one by one. I responded that her mother was the first to handle the situation. She launched into a lengthy, self-righteous lecture about how marriage was about commitment and working through challenges. I let her speak for around 30 seconds before cutting her off. "Go find Nina a more suitable boyfriend," I replied plainly. Then I hung up. Her sister tried next. That chat. Let's just say I wasn't particularly kind. I did not sugarcoat anything. I did not hold back. I told her just what I thought about Nina, of what she had accomplished. And when I was finished, I suggested she and Nina establish a new career together, because they were both so good at screwing people over. She screamed something at me before I disconnected the call. I didn't care enough to listen. By the end of the day, I'd blocked all of them. They were no longer my problem. 1 month later, things began to settle down. The mails and calls. Everything eventually came to an end. Nina had moved on. Or so I told myself. The truth was that she had probably found another sad person to grasp onto. But it didn't matter. As for me, I felt better than ever. I started doing things for myself. I resumed my old hobby, playing guitar. Something I'd put aside for years, because Nina said it was a waste of time. I was exercising more, getting back into shape, and feeling stronger than I had in years. I even arranged a solo trip to the mountains, which Nina would never have allowed, because she required constant supervision. Now I didn't have to get permission. I didn't need to explain myself. I just did whatever made me happy. And damn, it felt great. 9 months later, it was done. After the divorce was finalized, I no longer had to deal with Nina directly. My lawyer handled everything. It was a mess. It was just how I expected. But in the end, the truth emerged. My lawyer demonstrated that Nina stole money from our joint accounts and gambled it away. The judge didn't like that. He ensured that every dollar she had squandered was taken from our ultimate payment. In the end, I had to pay her almost $25,000. But it was finished. No more scream matches. No more manipulation. No more mental games. Just silence. Mike and I sat at the bar that night, with whiskey glasses in hand. He smirked and lifted his drink. "So, how does it feel?" "Officially free." I swirled the amber liquid in my glass before slowly sipping, as if I had just been released from prison. I replied with a smile. Mike chuckled. "Yeah, I guarantee you were ripped off for $25,000. I shrugged. I did the math. If I had hired someone to keep me company during my entire marriage to her, it would have cost me almost the same. Mike nearly choked on his drink while laughing. Damn, man. That is one perspective on the situation. I leaned on the bar, letting a wave of relief flood over me. Yeah, the sum I paid was justified. I am free. A year later, I saw Mike again at a cafe. He smirked as he noticed me raise his cup in greeting. Still ignoring me, he inquired, his tone amused. I chuckled and set my coffee down. Yep, Mike nodded in approval. Good on you, man. We spoke for a while, then Mike leaned in, slightly dropping his voice. Have you heard what happened to Nina? I raised an eyebrow. No. Should I care? His grin grew wider. She tried contacting you again. I think things did not go so well for her. I exhaled slowly, satisfied. She didn't see this coming. Mike laughed. Nope. She attempted to secure another loan to improve her condition, but it backfired. She has nothing left. Good, I said, shaking my head. She deserved it. Poetic justice. Mike responded with a chuckle. I bet she assumed you'd always be available to help her. Yeah, she did, I said, looking out at the busy street. But she was mistaken. Mike nodded. Good on you, man. For the first time in my life, I felt no guilt. Nina had assumed I'd always come back. She assumed I would always clean up her messes. However, she made an error in her calculations. A week later, I submitted the final papers. Nina had officially left my life, and nothing felt better. She'd made her decisions, and now she was facing the consequences. Choices. I was not going to aid her. I was not going to fix it. The woman who had devastated me, who had treated me as nothing more than a tool to achieve her goals, was no longer in my life. I spent my days doing whatever I wanted. I was not attempting to please anyone. I was not concerned about what others thought of me. I was doing something that made me happy. No more falsehoods. No more manipulation. There will be no more Nina. Finally, I had found the peace I had been searching for years. No more secrets. No more pretenses. I was able to breathe freely again. I'd spent so long trying to be someone I wasn't trying to change. Things I wasn't responsible for fixing. I'd let Nina, her family, and the weight of her marriage get to me. But, for the first time, I wasn't living for anyone other than myself. I had all I needed, my own place, life, and freedom. And that freedom was not limited to the bodily. It wasn't simply about getting out of that place, or avoiding the lies. It was about liberating myself from the shame, fear, and hatred that had kept me captive for so long. The months that followed were full of fresh adventures. I began to travel more, planning vacations to locations I'd always wanted to visit, but had never had the opportunity. I reunited with old friends, some of whom I had lost touch with while married. I began doing things for myself, free of the weight of others' expectations. Mike and I grew increasingly closer. He was the kind of buddy I'd always needed, someone who didn't judge, someone who supported me without expecting anything in return. We went on hikes, had beers after work, and laughed about everything, including the terrible stuff. Because I had rediscovered the humor of life. And as the months passed into a year, something extraordinary occurred. I started to feel like myself again. Not the version of myself who was attempting to prove anything to Nina, but the version that had been buried beneath the weight of her desires, manipulations, and the life we had created together. That man was gone. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was not trapped. I knew I'd never look back. What Nina and I owned, it was done for good. And, while I couldn't deny the grief and fury that had built up over the years, I also realized that the conclusion of that chapter marked the start of something far better for me. I had learned lessons that I would never forget, and I would take them with me into the future. I awoke each day feeling lighter. I realized I still had a long way to go before I could completely reconstruct myself. But I also knew I was going in the correct direction. The freedom I experienced now was more than just the absence of Nina. It was about the life I had reclaimed, a life I had almost forgotten how to lead. I wasn't bogged down anymore, and that was the most valuable thing I could ever possess. I'd reclaimed my life, dignity, and future. And I was not looking back. It felt nice. Damn good.